Afternoon and welcome to our MESDA Summer Institute final presentations. We're thrilled to have our folks here in the audience as well as people joining us on Zoom for what promises to be a wonderful conclusion to the 2024 MESDA Summer Institute. Our speaker this afternoon is Kiernan Bierley. Kiernan is a graduate of Appalachian State University. I'm sure I mispronounced that. Yep, yeah, I did. Appalachian State University, App State, keep it simple, and is the manager of the Visitor Center at Old Salem Museums and Gardens. Her talk is The Ivory, Crumb Trail, the Life of an Itinerant Artist. Kiernan?
Thanks, everybody. I'm super happy that you guys could come and be the last little bit of the Summer Institute. I want to take a moment to thank everybody here and everybody online and all of our Summer Institute people. I also really want to recognize Eloisa Hernandez, who took on the enormous task of stepping into my role for the entire month of June, and she did it so beautifully and so gracefully. So yay, Eloisa, for doing that. And honestly, without Eloisa pushing me to apply last minute, I probably would not have done it. So thank you, Eloisa. And I also want to thank the Tresla Family Fund for funding my experience. So allow me to tell you a short story. Imagine with me that you are this man, and you're reading the newspaper one day and you see an advertisement from an artist who's in town for only 2 weeks and to paint you and your loved one in miniature to have forever. You look in the mirror and think, hey, I look pretty good today. I think I'll get my portrait made. You grab your wife, who's also looking stunning today, and meet the artist who made the advertisement in the paper. You sit down with the artist and you tell him you want your likeness and the likeness of your wife memorialized for eternity so that you may each hold a piece of the other close. My object is a watercolor and ivory miniature portrait. The sitters depicted in the portraits are Charles Binns and Hannah Binns. Charles is dressed rather dapperly with a background of fluffy clouds and a blue sky that seems to suggest that he is a man who works outside of the home. We can see that he's aged as indicated by his thinning hair. There's also a possible broken nose from potentially a fight in his younger years. Hannah is adorned with a lovely white bonnet with her hair carefully tucked inside, with a simple sepia-colored background that suggests that she lives a more domestic life. She has soft, slightly rosy cheeks, and even though she is older, the artist has done a great job of eliminating most of the signs of aging. The Binns lived in Leesburg, Virginia for most of their lives. Charles was the second clerk of Loudoun County, succeeding his father, and Hannah Binns is of Scottish descent, her father being Captain or Colonel William Douglas, who served in the Revolutionary War. The couple lived rather long lives, living into their early 70s. They are depicted in their 50s in 1819, which is when this was painted. Charles, or Carl Wendell, the artist behind these portraits, was a German man who immigrated to America in his younger years and began his career as an itinerant artist. When MESDA acquired this object in 1982, this newspaper page came with it. This is an ad that Wendell had printed in the newspaper stating that he would be in Leesburg for 2 weeks to offer his services. This is one of many advertisements that he had printed to begin his career. What I'm aiming to do with this presentation is follow the trail of advertisements and paintings left behind Wendell to map the life of an itinerant artist. Artists of this time do move around every few years to follow the clientele base, but Wendell seems to be on the move constantly. For someone like Wendell to accomplish as much as he did in about 20 years is admirable. Wendell needed to overcome many challenges to get to where he ended up. He came to America as a young man, and then had to navigate this new land, presumably not knowing very much English. He cultivates his art. As he cultivates his art, Wendell learns not only the skills needed to produce art good enough to earn an induction in the National Academy of Design, but the skills needed to navigate America as a German immigrant. I will show you the progression of Wendell's art over the years and show you the skills needed for a delicate art form such as this. Charles Wendell was born in Germany circa 1795 and died in 1845 in New York. In 1832, he married his wife Amalia or Amelia Wartig. They had 4 or 5 children together, with the birth of their son Charles J. Wendell Sr. in 1843, just 2 years before Carl's death. Amalia moved to Louisville, Kentucky in about 1850, where she dies in 1879. It is unclear when he first came to America and when he began his career. In an interview, his son C.J. Wendell states that he arrives to America landing in Richmond, Virginia, but doesn't give a date. I will get more into detail about this later in my presentation. The earliest surviving piece of Wendell's that we have record of is my object. Wendell's about 24 years old when he painted these portraits for the bins. I am now going to take you on a little bit of a journey about Wendell's itineracy. Here I've created a map of Wendell's works that have survived. I've done my best to follow Wendell chronologically through his itinerant journey. Starting with the ad from Leesburg, Virginia in 1819, Wendell is moving around frequently. He doesn't stay in one town for longer than 3 weeks. Here we see him in Alexandria in 1820. Heading down south, he hits at Fayetteville in 1825. Shooting back up to Richmond in 1826. And back down to Georgia in 1828. Based on the dates of a few of his paintings and the newspaper ads that I can find, he seems to have visited a town more than once during his itineracy. During his time in each town he visits, we can assume that he's painting more than one specimen at a time. Here are a few of Wendell's surviving works compiled together. There are about 20 more works by Wendell that have been archived in the Frick Digital Collection, with dates ranging from 1827 to the early 1840s. In this compilation, there are a few from the Metropolitan, some at the Smithsonian, one here at Mesda, and the others that are sold at auction. There are a few pieces that were sold at auction that were attributed to Wendell, but were not signed and dated, like his other works are. He's fairly consistent with signing and dating his work. However, it's possible that in his later years, when he becomes more established in the world of art, he stops signing. Before he becomes established, Wendell is traveling to towns that are near ports, making stocking up on supplies fairly easy. Leesburg is close to the Potomac River, and Alexandria is basically right on the Potomac. As settlers are moving towards inland south, further away from port towns, certain supplies, such as ivory and watercolor paints, can be difficult to acquire. Though mercantile items are still moving through the inland south at this time, it probably just wasn't as easy to acquire. For artists like Wendell who are on the move, they would need to have easy access to supplies, hence opting to travel to towns that are in closer proximity to ports and large rivers. I would like to talk a little bit more about some supplies needed by an artist to complete their masterpiece and define a few things. What is ivory? Ivory is a hard calcareous substance of which teeth are composed, especially the tusks of the elephant and other certain large mammals. When I first encountered my object, I was in total awe that somebody could paint on a medium like this. Being a watercolor hobbyist myself, I was fascinated with the idea that someone could actually get this hard substance into something so thin and delicate. I probably spent the first 3 days looking up how to make ivory sheets and how you can cut an enormous tusk down to something just 2 millimeters thick. This is a picture that I took of some ivory sheets in Old Salem's collection. These sheets of ivory belong to Elias Vogler, a resident of Salem. Elias was somewhat of an artist himself, and later becomes a silversmith and a jeweler, much like his father, John Vogler. It's hard to see the thinness in this picture, but it was very delicate. When held up to the light, it is somewhat transparent, and you can see some lines. The lines that you're seeing are growth marks. Similar to growth rings on a tree, tusks also have growth marks. Again, it's hard to see in the picture, but the lines on the sheet are crosshatched and provide the sort of luminescence that miniature artists would use to their advantage. Shops would have 2 kinds of ivory, prepared ivory, and ivory ivory that one would have to prepare for themselves, which is pretty labor intensive. This is just a few steps on how to prepare ivory for painting. Depending on the artist, one might pick up prepared ivory to skip the labor involved in preparing ivory. As an itinerant artist, I would imagine that Wendell is choosing to buy prepared ivory for his practice, though there is no record of him buying ivory like this. Artists also had the choice of purchasing pigments and binders to prepare their own paint, or they could buy paints that were already prepared for them. Again, while there is no record of Wendell's purchases while he's on the move, we can assume that he's purchasing prepared watercolors. Now, to get back to the star, Wendell takes a trip back to Germany in about 1831, presumably trains in a European or German institute, married his wife in June of 1832, and then returns to America in December of the same year. The back of the passport is probably the most interesting. Most of the inscriptions are in German, but they track his year-long journey. This is an inscription that mentions his wife, Amalia. It's all in German, so I couldn't really make any sense of it, and I did try to translate it a little bit, but I couldn't find anything. But this indicates to me that he is now traveling around Germany with his wife, and then eventually back to America. As I mentioned before, Wendell presumably trained somewhere in Germany or in Europe during his trip back to Germany. Here we can see that his trip has influenced his art and is reflected in his later works. His art becomes more refined. In the 1836 piece, Wendell taps into realism, showing off his fine-tuned skills. It's fascinating to see how much of a difference 1 year of training can do. There is even a significant difference between his 1819 piece and his 1822 piece. He eventually settled in New York in the 1830s, then he gets inducted as an associate into the National Academy of Design in 1839. His art is exhibited annually from 1834 to 1844 at the Academy of Design. Wendell died in his home in New York in 1845, and his colleagues mourn the loss of a friend and a scholar and attend his funeral. One of the best ways that we as scholars can unveil the story about someone or something is through oral history. Here's the full article with the interview, which was conducted in 1898, which I had spoke about earlier. I reached out to a descendant on Ancestry, and she sent me back this article. CJ grows up in Louisville, Kentucky, and goes on to be an inventor with 32 patents. He goes on to say, "Yes, I have invented a number of patents, but I've never realized a cent on them." Later in the interview, CJ talks about his father, Carl. He shows the reporter Wendell's self-portrait that you saw in an earlier slide. Carl Wendell, possibly the most noted miniature painter of his day, it is of himself and is in perfect likeness. I will ask you to imagine with me again that you are the reporter talking to CJ. You ask CJ about his father, and you see him thoughtfully and carefully pull out a case lined with white satin. You watch his face as he opens the case, and maybe he smirks a little because he's recalled a memory. Then he proudly presents to you, the reporter, this golden medal with memories of Carl Wendell preserved. You think to yourself that this is the heirloom that is most likely the inspiration behind CJ becoming an inventor. Inscribed on this golden medal is "Medal awarded to Carl Wendell for Best Specimen of Miniature Painting, 1839. The National Academy of Design in New York presented this medal to Wendell the same year that he was inducted." We can see that CJ takes great pride in his father. This article that CJ was interviewed for talks about generational geniuses, so it would make sense that he's talking about his father in the way that he does. Wendell is not the only itinerant artist at this time, this itinerant miniature artist. There are other people who are doing the same thing that he's doing. What makes Wendell's story different from all the others is that he's an immigrant who had to overcome new challenges in each place he went to. Each single place he goes to, he's learning a new skill, be it English, a business practice, art skills, but he's also leaving behind a piece of him. We can see with each piece that he produces, Wendell is putting his whole heart into it. It's reflected in his later works and ultimately solidifies his induction into the Academy. All of the challenges that he faced in his career, he overcomes. Carl Wendell truly was the best miniature painter of his time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Kiernan, on helping us to understand this incredibly important but little-known artist. I know we'll all think differently about him and his work whenever we see Mr. and Mrs. Binns in the collection in the future. And thank you for those who joined us online and everybody who's been a part of making the MESDA Summer Institute in 2024 such a huge success. Thank you.